For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is John Eichberger. I'm the Executive Director of the Fuels Institute. Today, I'm going to be joined by Carl Donges. Carl is the Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Liaison for NACS. NACS is the association representing convenience and fuel retailers. Today's webinar is titled EV Charging Infrastructure. Where is it needed and how to get involved? And before we get started on that, just give you a little background on what's been going on this year and why we're doing this webinar today. Earlier this year, the Fuels Institute and NACS both launched a couple of new initiatives. The Fuels Institute launched an Electric Vehicle Council to bring stakeholders together to talk about infrastructure, do research on regulations, on site host best practices, look at consumer behavior to provide greater insight and familiarity with the emerging electric vehicle market for those who are interested in getting involved in the charging space. At the same time, NACS contracted with Carl to help them connect organizations who are looking to deploy chargers to connect them with NACS retail members to get chargers installed at convenience locations. So today we're combining what the Fuels Institute has done with the EV Council, what Carl is doing, and bringing to you some of the highlights from the most recent Fuels Institute report that was released just last month on EV market of focus on charging. So we'll be looking at some of the key findings from that. We're going to go through probably about 20, 25 slides today, get to the end and answer your questions. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we will get to those as soon as we can. So with that, show you the hero slide. I always put this out because I think it's important. If you're not intimately familiar with the Fuels Institutes, I think it's important to know who is leading the research agenda for the Institute, and that's our board of advisors. All the initiatives, all the research we do is brought to us by these individuals, representative these companies, to make sure that we're approaching the market and the research we're doing from a very objective perspective. You know, we launched an electric vehicle council. Not everybody on our board of advisors is in the electric vehicle business, but they see it as such a critical component of the transportation market going forward. And they really thought the Fuels Institute could do some objective research to help people better understand the opportunities and challenges associated with providing electric services to these EVs that are coming on the market. So I forgot to fill out the rest of the agenda, but we're going to start off with a quick overview of the EV market, an assessment of the current EV charging market, summary of where chargers need to be and what type, and then I'm going to hand it over to Carl. He's going to talk a lot more specifically about what we need to be thinking about in terms of charger installation, strategies for long-term viability of this new business enterprise, and what it means for the convenience industry specifically. But a lot of the lessons he's learning through his work in the infrastructure program for NACS are applicable to other channels of trade as well. So the first thing here is a slide. I always like to put the market growth of any technology in context, and I think it's really important. I put this chart together just last week on behalf of another work group I'm part of. And what it shows is in the green colors, you're seeing what we call the low plug-in electric vehicle adoption scenario. And that really is the U.S. Energy Information Administration's forecast for electric vehicles. And you see it goes up to about 5 or 6% of sales in 2040, or about 10% of sales in 2040, and about 5 or 6% of vehicles on the road being plug-in electric vehicles by 2040. You contrast that with what we call the high PEV adoption scenario, which I used Bloomberg New Energy Finance's forecast of 60% of all light-duty vehicles in 2040 being sold will be electric vehicles. And so you take a look at that contrast, and I think what is important about this is you see the impact of sales on fleet. The blue bar is the percent of vehicles on the road that would be electric. And even in a 60% sales market in 2040, the growth trajectory takes us to about 25, 27% of vehicles on the road. I put this out there because it's probably going to be somewhere in the middle over this timeline, but it gives you a range. Anywhere from about 6 or 7 to maybe 25, 27% of vehicles on the road in the next 20 years will be electric, which opens up opportunities and a demand for charging infrastructure in the market. One of the reasons the market's growing is because the technology is getting better. EV capabilities are getting much better, and especially in terms of range. Take a look at this chart, 24 different EVs available in the United States this year. I used MSRPs listed by Plug-in America for the state of Virginia, which is where I am. And you can see the range has improved. So many vehicles with more than 250 miles per charge. Prices are still high though. And the acquisition cost in our latest report is a challenge the market has to overcome. If you take a look here, there's a $7,500 tax credit from the federal government for the purchase of qualified electric vehicles. And that does not apply to Tesla anymore, and it does not apply to General Motors anymore because they've sold the cap of 200,000 electric vehicles already. And so their credits were phasing out. How important is the credit? In our newest study, there's a total cost of ownership calculator that you can actually download from a website, plug in the particulars for your market, your utility rates, how often you're taking a charge at home, charge in the market, and calculate what the cost of owning an electric vehicle will be for you compared to owning an internal combustion engine. In this example, the authors used New Hampshire and showed that in the absence of the federal tax credit, the total cost of ownership advantage of an electric vehicle diminishes greatly. That being said, it is still advantageous financially to own an electric vehicle over an internal combustion engine according to this calculator. So as we're dealing with that last chart here, where we see the cost of vehicles in the 40,000 and higher range, you have to think, to what extent is that going to influence a customer's decision to buy an electric vehicle? If they calculate the total cost of ownership, it might make a lot of sense. And in the next few years, because battery prices are coming down so fast, the ability to acquire and purchase an electric vehicle of equal capability to an internal combustion engine at a competitive price is very likely. We're talking the next couple of years here. Most likely you'll be able to buy an EV for about the same price you'd buy a comparative internal combustion engine, which makes it the consumer's decision now. And it makes it up to the consumer to say, I want to buy that vehicle or I don't want to buy that vehicle. When we take a look at the vehicles coming online, they're going to have choices. And so that's why we initiated these projects this year, because the market is moving this direction. We're not saying that EV is going to take over in the next 5, 10, 20 years. Clearly, they're not going to, but they are going to play a more significant role in the transportation market. And it's very important that companies and organizations that want to service customers need to be aware of that and think about what they can do to satisfy demand for electricity in the market. And that's where this comes in. So many surveys have confirmed that the availability and the speed of charging is a determinant factor in whether consumers want to consider an electric vehicle. Our own customer surveys a couple years ago showed that. The surveys here collated by ICF and our report show that. We need to make sure there's chargers in the market in order to give customers the comfort that they can get electricity when they need it. Now, there is a difference. And one of the studies we're going to be commissioning through the Electric Vehicle Council is trying to understand how much charging is necessary to satisfy demand versus how much charging is necessary to give customers comfort. You know, I like to joke around. In the United States, we like to buy to the extreme of our capacity. If you're in the market to buy a pickup truck, I want a pickup truck that can tow 15,000 pounds gross vehicle on my trailer, because who knows, someday I might need to use that. The same concept comes in range and charging. Customers want to have a charger in every corner. Do they need it in every corner? Customers say, I want a car that gets 500-mile range per charge. Do they need 500-mile range per charge? Or do they just need a high-speed charge so that they don't have to wait too long to travel the 500 miles in their trip that they're anticipating? That charging capability versus the need versus the desire is going to be something very important for people to consider when they're thinking about deploying chargers. A couple other things came out of our study, and Carl will touch on some of this, and I'll dive in as quickly. But one, there's a mismatch between the convenience of charging station locations and where EV drivers seek to charge. Customers for the last 100, 120 years have gone to gas stations to fill up their car. That's why NACS launched this initiative. They believe that if we put chargers at gas stations, that's where customers are used to going. It makes sense. It's convenient. They're right there. Give them the energy where they've always gotten their transportation energy. But we're not seeing the deployment of chargers necessarily where the customers would traditionally look for them. Some of that have to do with the fact that they take longer to charge, so they're put more out of the way. They're put in places where people are going to spend more time than traditionally at a gas station convenience store. But the deployment strategies don't quite meet the customer behavior trends we've seen over the last 20, 30 years. The second one here is the EV charging market is plagued by a lack of interoperability and standardization. Every single charger has a different platform from whichever company is organizing it and offering it. So how do we create a system where the EV driver doesn't have to have 10 different apps on their phone in order to initiate a charge? How do we make them interoperable with every vehicle? How do we make this more consumer friendly so that the consumer who's driving an electric vehicle doesn't have to go through hurdles to get electricity for their car when they need it? These are things we need to look at. And an example as we look at the deployment strategy, I mean, people have talked about this. If you've been in the electric vehicle market for a while, you know this already, but the estimation of most research experts is 70 to 90% of charging is happening at home. They're plugging in their garage. However, as we grow market share, we're going to have people buying electric vehicles that live in apartment complexes. And there's a lot of legislation and regulations being put in place to require a certain percentage of parking at an apartment complex to have a charger. That's great progress, but it's not going to satisfy everybody. And so the need for in-market charging is going to grow as the population of electric vehicles grow and the demographics of who owns those vehicles gets more diverse. And so you're seeing here level 1, level 2, and DC fast charging where their deployment makes sense. And we need to be thinking about what charging capabilities we're deploying, where, when, and what rate. There are a lot of companies out there looking to deploy 350 kilowatt chargers. There's only 1 or 2 vehicles in the world that can absorb a 350 kilowatt charge. That is irrelevant, in my opinion. Ultimately, those vehicles coming on the market in the next 5 to 10 years are going to be equipped with technology to accept a fast charge. We're hearing reports of a new charger who can deliver 75-mile range in 5 minutes. We're going to have vehicles that can get 100, 150-mile range in 5 to 10 minutes. We need to build capacity to future-proof the installation of this equipment to satisfy the needs of the customer when the customer needs that type of service. So we installed a system. Let me go back real quick. One of the challenges, however, is so far we've been deploying level 2. So if we go back to this quote here, there's a mismatch between convenience of charging station locations and where. It ties into this. If you take a look at the Alternative Fuel Database Center, they count how many charging stations are in the United States. 90% of the publicly accessible charging stations are level 2. That is a faster charge than plugging in an outlet at home, but it is not a fast charge. It does not satisfy that need of a customer to get 100 miles in 5 to 10 minutes. It will never do that. So we built up this infrastructure. 90% of the chargers are level 2, yet we're evolving into a market where that DC fast charger is going to be so much more critical. The question now comes into how do we do it and where do we deploy it? And in our report, you can download this. The URLs here on the bottom left. You can access this from the Fuels Institute website as well. The researchers who did our report built 10 case models, and they created mapping software where you could play around with it. So I did a couple screen captures here at Denver. On the left side of the screen are plots within Denver, and you can zoom in and get actually street corners and everything, where they're estimating on a range from 1 to 6, 6 being most demand, where chargers will be needed in the market during the development of an electric vehicle market. That's the one on the left. Now you shift over to the one on the right and you see more dark colors. You see more 4s, more 6s. This is the projection once the Denver market is a mature electric vehicle market. And so you can zoom in and say, okay, I operate facilities, stores, whatever, in this area, in this neighborhood. In this mapping software, you can zoom into that map, that area, and you can find out exactly where it looks like based upon analysis of where people live, where the garages are, what kind of trips they travel, what type of traffic is going through that neighborhood, where we project that EV charging is going to be required and in demand. So it's a good way to kind of validate, I'm in a market where there may be demand, maybe I need to start thinking about offering the service. We did 10 different cities. And so even if your city's not in there, look at the list of the cities and pick one that's similar to your demographic profile in your market. And look at that. Starts giving you an example that you can possibly extrapolate to help you better understand your market as you start thinking about when should I install chargers or where should I install chargers. So it's a good resource to look at. That, the total cost of ownership calculator I mentioned earlier, and then the full report itself really is a wealth of knowledge of the electric vehicle charging market and what we need to be thinking about, the relationship of a charging host with their utilities, how to navigate that, what are the opportunities and challenges there. It's a research project really worth reading if you're interested in getting the EV market. From the Fuels Institute, the EV Council I mentioned earlier, we're doing the regulatory assessment. That report actually is looking at every single state, reviewing the regulations associated with installation and operation of charging stations, and then is diving into about 100 different cities and counties that have been identified as either examples of regulations that facilitate deployment and operation, or those that kind of impede deployment and operation. So for those looking at it, you can take a look at that and get an idea of how easy is it for you to get in the business in your market, and what might need to be changed in the regulations in your market to make it easier. Then we're gonna start building a site host education toolkit. Will help you evaluate the feasibility of having a charger at your facility, decision tree for you to help navigate what you need to be doing, where you need to be looking, who you need to be talking to, and best practices and case studies so you can kind of design a site that makes a lot of sense for you and your customers. And then I also mentioned we're doing a consumer behavior analysis to find out what are consumers looking for in a charging location? What are they willing to accept? What kind of payment methodologies are they willing to adopt? Both now, but also as the market expands and we start getting different types of people driving electric vehicles, what are those types of customers looking for? And is it different from what we're seeing today? And so we have that balance. So that's going to be initiated later on this year. These are research projects. Once they're peer reviewed and ready to go, they'll be publicly available for everybody to take a look at and learn from. And I hope it's something that you guys find valuable. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Carl. He's going to talk about what he's been doing with NACS, what he's learned, and give you some insight as to what we're really seeing in terms of what it's going to take to charge and deploy resources in your market. Carl, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. If we can go ahead and move on to the next slide here, John. Let's dive right in. So what we've got here is I want to walk you through the evolution of a natural progression in analyzing all this. And the most basic question that we want to look at is, how do we start with starting with why should we even paying attention to this? And as we all know, the convenience retail industry is really focused on the vehicle and its passengers. And as our core customers start to migrate from internal combustion engines over to electric vehicles, ignoring it's not an option. So it's really more about we're at the early end of this. We have to understand it and see how we adapt. But our customer is still our customer. And if they change the way they have mobility, it's just a matter of us adapting to their mobility. But we still need the sales, we still need the convenience items and the ancillary services to be sold. And the demand for these items are still going to be there. It's just the methodology in which our customer moves around is evolving, and we have to evolve with that. But the market is still there, and the opportunity for profit is still there. And so one of the things in light of that is, how do we start looking at what changes with our customer, and what are the habits of the customer that change when they do switch from internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle, and how does that affect how we market to that group? There's simple little things you can start noticing already, and that might create more opportunities for us when you do offer the electric vehicle charging. And that is, everyone has an iPhone or an Android phone, and you don't sit there and plug that thing in, have it 100% charged, and then, well, at least most people, I would argue, and then go all day without charging it again. A lot of people will continue to top it off when they have a chance. If they're in the car, they plug it in. If they're in the office, they plug it in and they keep it charged throughout the day, and they top it off. We're seeing some of the same dynamics with people that own electric vehicles. And this could result in more trips to a convenience store because they're wanting to top off throughout the day when they want to go get lunch, when they want to go do this. And I'm going to show you a statistic later on in some of the slides that actually quantifies this. Also, another aspect that is important to look at is that the EV charging session is longer than a gasoline fueling session. That means you have that customer at your store, which enables the opportunity for selling QSR or other items, and it's an opportunity to sell more products and have them in your store for a greater amount of time, which is obviously a benefit. Other things, EV owners do look at ancillary services besides just going in and buying convenience items. There's nuances on a vehicle, a lot of safety features. A lot of the autonomy capabilities are built around sensors and cameras that are embedded in these new electric vehicles. Those things don't work, and if they're clean, or if the sensors are obstructed. So car washes and cleaning become significantly more important. An electric vehicle weighs a lot more than an internal combustion engine, and they go through tires more, and tire health is much more important. So things like tire inflation, rotation, or even for some people, the replacement of tires happens at a greater frequency, and another opportunity. And these types of nuanced differences in the patterns and the attributes of an electric vehicle and its passengers are things that are popping up that are going to give us new opportunities to sell things, and we just have to monitor. So the customer's not going away, but the way the customer behaves and moves around is changing, and we have to move around that. Okay, next slide. John, can you give me the next? There we go, perfect. So what are the site attributes? I'm going to break this down into two sections. The first are the site attributes that are needed for the physical infrastructure of being able to deploy at a convenience store. And that's even going to be broken down into two different scenarios. The second are what are the site attributes that we're seeing that build a successful convenience store around EV charging. So the first one is the physical capability of offering the service. The second is how do you bring them in the store, and what creates a profitable EV charging site. So when you look at just what are the site attributes you need that an EV charging company is going to look at when they want to come to your site and possibly utilize your footprint for EV charging, the key and most important aspect is your utility access, your access to power. Obviously, to do DC fast charging, it requires a good amount of power, and having that separate from the utility service that is servicing inside the store will give you options on better rates that are focused just for EV charging and some regulations. Or if you want to separate out and you want someone else to own and operate that and you don't want to deal with it right now, having that separate utility service that can be focused in on just the EV charging gives you more flexibility. In addition to, not all places have access to enough power to get EV DC fast charging installed. Space, you have to have room for at least, I would say, 3, 4 or more for charging locations, and also the freedom to operate is a critical aspect as well. And what I mean by that is when you're leasing a store, some stores do not have it written into the lease that they are allowed to sell electricity or have EV charging at their site. And it's significantly more difficult to get that addressed after the lease is already signed as opposed to before it's done. Now, on those attributes, I know the Fuels Institute and NACS is going to be producing documents that we're going to have on the website that will address these things. Everything from, as John already mentioned, on how to navigate if you want to put that into a new store or retrofit your existing store, or if you even just want to start looking at how do I future-proof a new store that I'm building or an old store that I'm renovating, so I have this option in the future. Because when you do these things, when you install these capabilities, even if you don't go all the way to full service charging and just create the infrastructure that allows for it, it is significantly lower cost to do that up front than it is to break concrete and try and retrofit it in the future. So that's a critical thing to think about, and that's stuff that items that we will be addressing and making available to everyone as we move forward. Now, the second part of this is site attributes that create an optimal EV charging experience at a convenience store. And one of the things that we are doing and working on is we have our group within the Fuels Institute, but NACS will also be trying to aggregate retailers that are already doing electric vehicle charging, get them into working groups and start having a regular conversation of what they're seeing works and what doesn't work, and have everyone share these best practices. That's going to be critical going forward, especially because it's such a quickly and rapidly evolving industry, and the technology behind it is changing, which changes the way it is deployed and the way it is utilized at a convenience store. Some of the things that we're already seeing right now are very obvious things. Wi-Fi and 5G access. Most people, when they go to a charging site, and if they're going to be there for 20 minutes or more, especially if they want a full charge and they're not topping off, what they do is that a lot of people sit down and turn on Netflix and start watching a show. And they need the Wi-Fi or 5G access to be able to do that. That is a very important feature, because that is a common use case. Has to be well lit, has to be safe. The clean restrooms are like, this is no different than the regular C-store industry. You're seeing a lot of commonalities. Clean restrooms are absolutely critical. QSR is important. The longer they're there, the more likely they are to go in there and get QSR. We already talked about car wash and tire inflation. These are things that are very important for electric vehicles. We find that a lot of the early adopters that are going into the higher end models or EV chargers, electric vehicles, which are akin to a lot of the Mercedes and the BMW type vehicles, the luxury vehicles. They will spend money on branded coffee. They will spend money on prepared foods, on organic items and things like that. So you have to know your demographic. But these are things that we're already seeing that are that the driver of an EV is purchasing today, or an attribute that is important to them today. Okay, next slide. Things to have to watch and consider. I'm going to put these things out there at a high level, and then we're going to go through each one with a little bit more granularity. But the things that are driving this, and this gets into why you should pay attention to it, because these items are not going away. You got regulation, the time factor, microdata, and technology. And what I mean when I say regulation is there's a lot of regulation driving electric vehicles. And as you see, we're in the next slides, just because there's a regulation in China or Europe or a state that's not yours, a lot of people tend to say, well, you know what, it's not coming to my market. My state's not mandating it. It's not important here. I'm going to walk you through that. Actually, no, it is driving. It's having an effect on what's happening in your market. And so you have to look at the holistic picture on the regulatory market, on the regulatory scheme, and it is driving electric vehicles. And this is being the visible manifestation of this is what are the big OEM vehicle manufacturers doing? They're putting all their money, a lot of the money, into electric vehicles. Some of them have already said we're no longer developing new internal combustion engines. They are obviously optimizing, continuing to improve the engines that they have now, but they're not going out and developing brand new engine types and classes because they think it's an asset that's in the waning and everything's moving over into the electric vehicle side, and that is where they're putting their R&D money. So you can see that this is having a significant impact on where they're investing for the future. Time, the things that we're going to look at is, don't forget, these are 20+ year assets when you build a convenience store. And so you cannot take a snapshot of where you are today to make a decision that will impact you in 20 years, especially in an industry that's moving as rapidly as electric vehicles. So we'll touch on that. Microdata. Even at this infant stage, and John's already said it, these things that we're talking about, they're not going to come overwhelm you here in the next year or two. This is something that's going to gradually come into place, but you will start feeling the impacts right now, and it's not going to be the same everywhere. Certain demographics are going to move faster and have a much greater impact right now than other demographic groups. Certain cities and locations and regions have to address this right now, and they are in the middle of it. Others don't have to worry about it for 5 years. So when you look at all the national data of the population of the vehicle fleet, that those are critical data points to really give you a good big picture of what's happening. But when you apply it to your business, you have to focus in on the micro data and what's going on in your specific market, because it's what's happening in some markets is not happening in other markets, and you have to pay attention to that. And then obviously technology, we already touched on this. The pace of advancement is just amazing. And John already put a slide up there on battery technology and the cost of batteries. It is coming down very rapidly, and we're seeing that's going to be in all aspects of electric vehicles. You're seeing that in the autonomous capability, the battery range, the charging capability, and a lot of these vehicles already have the capability to be completely autonomous when they're on the highway. And they can get on the highway, go wherever they want to go, change lanes, slow down, speed up, and react to other vehicles around them, exit where they're supposed to exit without any human oversight. It's just the regulations haven't allowed that yet. That's going to continue to develop. And also, we have a lot of new technologies that the vehicles are embedded with that have advanced communication systems that will allow all kinds of transactional capabilities. And some of these NACS is actually in the middle of, such as age verification in a digital format that allow you to purchase items and order items from your vehicle. And we're going to get into some of what those are. And these are designed to let you know what's coming so you can start thinking about these things. Okay, next slide. So on the regulation side, you can see right here, when we look at the United States, I would say the most impactful, most obvious one is the California Zero Emission Vehicle Standard. And it's not really just California. I think the way it's moving now, and a lot of states have already decided they're going to opt in, and they're in the process of finalizing that and getting it implemented. When it's all said and done, it's projected that 23 of the states will have adopted that. That is a significant portion of the United States and a significant portion of the vehicle fleet. that we'll have that zero emission vehicle standard, which does really drive electrification. A lot of states already have incentives in place, financial incentives and regulatory incentives that promote electric vehicles or the deployment of the infrastructure. Getting out of the United States, and I'm going to go through these things because they impact what's happening in the United States. The European Union has a strict carbon dioxide restriction policy that went into effect this year. And in some of the individual countries, they do more than try and incentivize electric vehicles. They are mandating the phase out of internal combustion engines. Same thing in China. China has a new energy vehicle mandate. It actually expressly phases out internal combustion engines over time. And China is 1/3 of the global light duty vehicle market. Why is all that important? What's happening in EU and China? Well, vehicle manufacturers don't manufacture vehicles really just for one niche market. These are global companies. And if a huge portion of the United States, because they've gone into the zero emission vehicle standard, and all of China and a big portion of Europe are all saying we're really pushing EVs, or in certain cases, in a lot of cases, ending the internal combustion engine by a certain time, this has an impact on what happens in areas that do not have these mandates. They're not going to have a micro business strategy just for Oklahoma or another state that doesn't buy into all these things. The vehicle population is global, and so these regulations and incentives and mandates that come in from around the world, they have an impact, and the trend is clear. They're requiring the electrification of vehicles and the shifting of internal combustion engines away from internal combustion engines into electric vehicles. So next slide. I think it's the 20 plus there, 20 plus years. There we go. So this is an important aspect. So, this is a real world situation. I was dealing with a convenience store chain that had, I believe, about 500 stores, and they really wanted to look at electric vehicle charging. And I was talking with the person in charge of the program, and he was very focused in his analysis, and he went and got an electric vehicle, and he started saying, all right, here's the deal. This is what the charging experience is like. And, and he's making comments such as, the range just isn't there. So I'm not worried about my highway stops because no one's going to use these things for long road trips because there's not enough chargers out there. The range isn't there. But I think in my urban markets, this might make sense. And I asked him, I said, well, I asked him why is he making that assumption for new stations that he's building that are going to be last for 20 years? And he goes, well, it's no different than my oil and gas market. I really try to understand the behavior of the consumer, and I try to build on top of that. And this is a very intelligent individual, but he's just used to working in refined products, and that is a mature industry that's been around for 100 years. And we're now at a very mature state where new technological development has incremental improvements, not vast disruptive changes. EVs were at the very beginning of the technological evolution, and the changes are very stark, they're very rapid, and they're very disruptive. So what it looks like right now, what it looks like in 5 years from now are two vastly different things. And I think nobody really believes that in 20 years, EVs are only going to be a fraction of the industry like they are now. We're going to have significant growth, and it is going to have an impact on convenience retailing. And so you have to look at, all right, I'm building a 20-year asset store. If I don't address the future capabilities of electric vehicle charging now, and in 5 to 10 years, that industry is a significant portion of the vehicle fleet and a part of the culture of mobility, and I want to sell my store, I have negated I've lessened the value of that asset because I've not future-proofed that asset. And for a nominal cost, you can future-proof any new store or store that you're retrofitting, so you don't have to go into EV charging now, but it's coming, and you have the capability and you have that choice anytime in the future. And that's going to be critical because not only does it preserve the value of the asset, but it also allows you to react very quickly when you have made the decision that, yes, the return on investment is there, I want to move, as opposed to saying, oh boy, let me start the permitting process, let me bust up concrete, let me retrofit this, let me try and talk the utility company to coming in and bringing the power and waiting at their pace to bring power that's adequate to my site. Right now, utility companies are motivated. They know this is coming. They want to sell more electricity. They will pay to build out the infrastructure, and putting in conduit to allow these things before you put concrete or pavement down is significantly lower cost than retrofitting and breaking concrete to do these things. And again, we'll have more documents on this, but this is something that you need to think about. That we have 20-year assets. Try and think what this is going to look like in 20 years, not what it looks like right now, because as we've already discussed, the charging times are going down significantly. The range is going up. The prices are going down. That's going to be greater population. And something else that we could spend days just discussing this one topic, that's the convergence of autonomy and on-demand technologies that are combining with EVs, and that's going to change mobility in its entirety as well. And that's something that we're going to have to watch as those things unveil, and those things will start to come into play in the next 10 to 20 years. Next slide. So we discussed this earlier. Don't look at, it's good to have a holistic 30,000 view of the industry to see what's happening in the United States. But when it comes down to your business and the profitability of your business and what are your consumers doing, you can't look at what's happening all over the United States, because what happens in Des Moines is not what's happening in Austin, Texas, or Atlanta, Georgia. These are very different markets, and you have to look at the micro data. So, one thing I want to say is, even if the percentage of EVs in the United States are small, those small percentages still have a significant impact in certain markets. So nationally, it's a small percentage. In California, it's a big percentage. And same thing in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, Georgia. You're seeing these areas where people are having to pay attention to electric vehicles right now, and it's having significant impact on the business in those communities, whereas people in more rural areas, such as Billings, Montana, are not having to focus on this yet. So look at where you are. Additionally, you have to look at the demographics. What we're seeing is electric vehicle adoption in the luxury vehicle class is actually picking up to a pretty good pace. And so you'll have a market where maybe necessarily there's not a lot of electric vehicles, but that small percentage of people that were driving Mercedes and Jaguar and BMWs, they're now buying Teslas. And so that may not seem like a big deal, but when you're selling premium fuel, and that's a high margin, low volume fuel, you will see that impact pretty quickly when a good chunk of your luxury vehicles is shifting over to electric vehicles. Again, looking at the micro data, it's important to do what are the demographic groups doing, what are the different regions doing. So these are the things that need to be observed. In addition to that, so if you notice that your premium sales are going down, you're seeing more and more Teslas and Jaguar I-Paces and BMW, electrified BMWs, as opposed to the old internal combustion luxury vehicles. These demographic groups also have buying habits that can be tracked, and we're seeing them. They use the car wash more often. They clean the inside of their cars. They buy the branded coffee or the organic products more often. And so if you have site attributes or EV charging capability in a car wash that can attract those people, they will buy these items that we're already seeing them buy in other stores. Okay, next slide. The technology side. We already talked about the pace of technology development is rapid right now, and it is having an impact on the stores. One of the key things we're seeing that's going to cause a change in how business is transacted, and that is when you have an electric vehicle, usually a credit card is attached, or a bank account is attached to that vehicle. And right now the standards are being written to make this homogeneous across the world. So you plug in a electric vehicle into a charger, the charger recognizes the vehicle, they made up, the charging session starts, the billing is done on the card associated with that vehicle, and it's completely touchless and frictionless. And that's going to be the standard. And right now, there are still some charging sites where you have to swipe a card, you have to have an account, but this quote unquote plug-in charge capability is being embedded into all the vehicles and all the charging infrastructure, and this is coming. Well, the same dynamic will have an effect on buying other goods and services, not just charging the vehicle. And so you have to rethink, well, how do I sell, and how is the transaction conducted when you have the bank account associated with that person's vehicle? And the NACS is already working on having platforms for convenience store owners to be able to plug into, so people that have the Tesla or the Mercedes-Benz app with their electric vehicle, either from the dashboard or from the app, can purchase through the vehicle, through the app, and do it in a seamless way, almost as if they're doing it with the charging, and it goes right to the banking information or the card that's associated with the vehicle. These are things that we have to work through, but there's more. You know, that when you are transacting with a vehicle that is basically a rolling iPad, you have a lot of technological capabilities that will allow for things that we've never considered, and that's what we call the geofencing side of it. And there are programs that one of the big QSR chains is working on right now, so they can order a sandwich or a food product from the vehicle or the app, and then the transaction goes through. Then they can track the vehicle, and when they're within 5 minutes of the restaurant, they get a message asking them, all right, we notice you're on your way. Would you like us to start cooking right now? And you can respond, yes. They start cooking your sandwich or whatever it is you've ordered. And then when you arrive, they can bring it out to your car. These types of technological capabilities do not exist right now, but they're being deployed with electric vehicles. And so there's a lot of new things that are coming. And that dynamic that we just mentioned with the sandwiches, imagine groceries and dry cleaning, and then you embed into it NACS's age verification program that they're doing with Connexus. That then enables lottery tickets and alcohol products and other age restricted items to be rolled into it. And there's a lot of changes that are going to be coming that are going to be enabled by these technologies, and being able to enable them in a frictionless and seamless way. So next slide. So what are we doing? And John can probably speak to a lot more of these things because we're doing these in conjunction with the Fuels Institute. Is we are always looking at new opportunities in the evolution of the market. And a great way to keep on top of these things, if you look at our website, is the NACS Daily and the NACS Magazine. We have webinars like this one at both at NACS and the Fuels Institute that we'll be doing throughout the year as this industry evolves. We have shows and education workshops. The specific program I'm working on is the infrastructure referral program. I'm working with the EV charging companies to dive into specific areas where they know they need charging right now, or they know it's coming, and I help them match up with the convenience retailer that they can work with, and vice versa. I'm going out to areas where we see a lot of growth, and I'm asking which convenience retailers are interested in having me go back to the charging companies to say you're interested. So we're trying to match up to make sure that our industry is the leading location for EV charging, to keep those drivers and those passengers buying our items, not making sure someone else fills in that void that's coming. And then,
Carl, I can fill in the rest of this here. So the NACS show is a go for this year, unless the government says you can't. And the plan is to have a very robust show. There's a lot of pent-up demand for getting together and learning what's going on in the market, going to trade shows to boost business interest. And we've got pretty good, strong registration. So we're very much looking forward to that event. Within that, Carl mentioned the education workshops. We have 3 or 4 education programs being put together that are focused on electrification of travel, focused on charging. So very good educational content to the programming there. But we're also launching for the first time an electric vehicle pavilion. Located just outside the trade show floor is going to be a suite of exhibitors showing charging equipment, charging services, offering their perspectives and their service to help people, convenience retailers, get into the business. And we're trying to secure a couple vehicles. The plan was a ride and drive. We'll see if social distancing allows that to happen, but give people an opportunity to touch, feel, smell, hopefully drive an electric vehicle, learn from the education sessions, then visit with the vendor to talk about what opportunities exist for their business. So that's all happening in October. And then I already mentioned what the Electric Vehicle Council is doing, the regulatory assessment, the site host education toolkit, and then the consumer behavior research that we're doing right now. And that's, it's amazing. We started that and launched it in February. The COVID shutdown started in March, but we have generated quite a bit of interest, and we've got a lot of stuff off the ground and running. So that's a lot of momentum. It's going to be delivering a lot of good value to the market going forward. And with that, Carl, you have any final comments before we go to quick Q&A?
I think we gave a good 30,000 foot level, but if we want to get into the details, I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
So I got a couple questions here that were listed. First, is there a list of states that allow a non-utility to sell electricity? And there is. I don't have it in front of me, and I haven't put it together to use it, and I've been meaning to do that for quite a while. There are a number of states out there that say, unless you're a regulated utility, you cannot sell electricity by kilowatt hour. The challenge is National Conference of Weights and Measures has put together a method of sale for electric vehicles that pretty much requires the sale of by kilowatt hour. So there's a conflict in regulations. I think the regulatory assessment that the EV Council is doing will address that as well. But that is definitely something you need to pay attention to in your market. There are ways around it. I mean, we're selling electricity in the market through contracts, through memberships, through access fees, through time fees. There are a variety of ways to generate some revenue from selling electricity to electric vehicles without selling by kilowatt hour. But there are strategies that need to be evaluated to do that. The next question is, has any research been done on how the road tax will be conveyed to EVs as the EV market increases and road tax is affected as a result of potential reduced liquid fuel sales? That's been a question for a long time. You know, the Highway Trust Fund has been underfunded for as long as I've been in Washington, D.C., which is 25 years just about. And it has been absolutely kicked down the can every single time it comes up. The United States Congress has not had the political guts to really figure out how to fix that in terms of funding infrastructure in general. When you add in electrified vehicles, you add in improved efficiency internal combustion vehicles, you are seeing the combination of the two reduce Highway Trust Fund revenues. Do you supplement that loss of revenue by increasing the gas tax and basically fund infrastructure improvements and maintenance on the backs of those who are driving internal combustion engines? Do you figure out some sort of way to allocate some portion of the revenue generation required to the electric vehicles and the plug-in hybrids? That's something that they've been trying to figure out and they haven't quite figured out yet. I have my own ideas, but nobody really asks me those questions very much anymore. And I see that Pete O'Connor from Plug-in America has put out a fact sheet on that as well. There are a lot of options, a lot of strategies. Just a question of who's going to recommend them, who's going to have the wherewithal to push through a legislative initiative to make it law, and who's going to vote for it. Profiles Encourage is not the subtitle for a story on Congress. The next question down here is premium vehicle owners, the iPace and Tesla asked, which Carl is referring to, tend to own single-family homes. And since 80-90% of the time they charge at home, if they usually buy premium fuel, they're going to still come to the convenience store, or they just go to Starbucks and get their branded coffee and bypass the C-store altogether. Carl, you're the one who brought up the potential for loss of premium sales, higher margin item sales to the higher end EV owners. To that question, if they have a garage, will they even go to the convenience store anymore once they get an electric vehicle?
Absolutely. And I think we had a data point in one of the slides that said that they're seeing a lot of the EV owners are averaging 2.8 charging sessions per week outside of their house. That gets to that dynamic of it's like topping off all the time. They treat their car like their iPhone. And so the theory is that they may not be there for a long time because they're just topping off, but they're still doing that. And some of the charging companies are even coming to us and saying, okay, I can't always get the EV charging infrastructure at the convenience store. Can I get the convenience store to come to the EV charging? And so NACS is working on some ideas to enable bringing the convenience items from all the people in the area on a delivery basis to the EV charging site. So the answer is yes, because those vehicles we're seeing the patterns where they're still going to the EV charging spots. And so that's where that connection is, where the opportunity is to sell.
We had another question put forth in the chat feature about this first chart here that I put up. And the question was, let me pull it up here so I get it right. The question was, does that include credits? Is the battery cost included in that? So EIA did the forecast on the low scenario. EIA included CAFE program that existed before the Safer Vehicles Act regulation was enacted because it was published in January 2020. They included the tax credit, but I don't know how they treated it throughout. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, Their latest report, and again, the details, I don't have the solid details because I'm not a client of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, so I only have the executive summary that they published, and they just put in percentages of sales. They did include some accommodation for COVID because this was published in April, I believe, April or May. Do they assume tax credits? Don't know. And for my purposes, I'm putting this slide up here was really just to show the different range. And you can change inputs on these forecasts. This is just showing trajectory that if we get this type of sales growth, whether it be in the high adoption or the low adoption, the real thing I wanted to point out here is the impact on the fleet. And that's where, when Carl's talking about the impact on a fuel retailer's business, sales are always trend indicated. And if you've been on any of my webinars before, I always say, look at the sales for the trends, but for the actual impact on the market, you got to look at the inventory of vehicles on the road. So knowing high numbers of sales are celebrated by advocates of electric vehicles, but they don't necessarily tell the whole story. You have to look at how long vehicles stay in the market and what their turnover rate is. Next question. Would slides be shared? Yes, slides will be shared. I think Donovan posted that he's going to share them all tomorrow, I believe. And I think we're also going to take this recorded webinar and put it up on our website too. It's going to be part of the resources that NACS has put up on the convenience.org site. Those resources are available at convenience.org/EV. If you are interested in looking at the research that I mentioned earlier, the total cost of ownership calculator, and the link to the charger siting analysis, go to fuelsinstitute.org, go to the research tab, and click on the reports on the EV adoption focus on charging. And within that landing page, you can download the executive summary, the full report, link to the charging analysis, and download the total cost of ownership. And I think I've addressed all the questions that were asked that I have not answered yet. Jim Burris pointed out that he's estimating that the number of states that do not allow you to sell by kilowatt hour is probably about 16. He thinks 34 allow the sale of by kilowatt hour. Still, that's 16 that are creating an impediment to getting into this business. It's important to know, and Carl alluded to this, that the market for electric vehicles is growing. The business case for chargers is developing. It's not likely that if you install a charger today, you're going to start making money tomorrow, a profit, but it's about preparing yourself to take care of your customers. And what I've started using as a line in presentations before I stopped traveling this year was, you have a customer that comes in today, buys a tank of gas, buys a soda, a cup of coffee, goes to the bathroom, goes home. Maybe they go out and they buy an electric vehicle tomorrow. Do you want that customer coming back to your store? You got to think about it that way. Not all your customers are going to go buy an electric vehicle tomorrow. Some of them might. And the question comes, how are you going to keep them coming to your store? By having a charger, whether they use it or not, you are demonstrating to them that you want to service them. You want to be part of their community. The electric vehicles that are sold have computers in them that have a list of every charger in the country. And being part of that list gives you an advantage over competitors that do not, to keep that driver of a new technology coming back to your store. And I think it's important to keep that in mind and think about it as you're looking at the future of the market. With that, Carl, thank you very much for joining us. I really appreciate you sharing your perspective, what you've learned in the infrastructure program. If anybody is interested in getting involved in Electric Vehicle Council or getting involved with Carl on trying to get some infrastructure deployed to convenience stores, contact us. My email, Carl's email, was on the initial slide. I'll bring it back up here again so you know how to get a hold of us. Right here, J. Eichberg at fieldsinstitute.org, K. Donges at convenience.org. Reach out to us. We'd love to work with you, help you out with anything we can. And with that, one last question came in before I say goodbye. What happens to the growth curve if a huge improvement in battery technology happens in a short time period? Yeah, the growth curve that I have in there is just basically other people's projections. It all assumes. I don't think Bloomberg New Energy Finance, that 60% growth, I don't think this is feasible unless something dramatic happens, unless costs come down, battery technology improves greatly. We have hundreds of new EV models come to the market. Dealerships try to sell electric vehicles. I don't think that 60% is feasible. That being said, policies change, technology changes. Anything that makes the electric vehicle more attractive we'll start filling in the gap between this low PEV scenario and the high PEV scenario and get us to where we end up somewhere. So with that, everybody, thank you again for joining us on a Thursday afternoon for yet another webinar. Again, this has been John Eichberg and Carl Donges. So Carl, thank you again, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.